welcome to today's Roundtable sponsored by NAPO. I am Dr. Skylar King from Washington University at St. Louis, and I will be moderating today's workshop, which is sponsored by NAPO's Growth and Enrichment Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that you can type your questions in the question box in the control panel throughout the workshop. We will also take live questions from the audience. If you wish to do so, please raise your hand using the hands icon. When we recognize you, please unmute your mic and ask your question. This session will be recorded and archived on the NAPO website. Our roundtable today features an expert panel from BioScience Writers. Together, they bring decades of experience in high-level research, professional technical writing, and business development within life science. And I'd like to introduce them to you now. First, we have the president of BioScience Writers, Dr. Susan Marriott, who is also a professor at Baylor College of Medicine. Next is Dr. Charlene Emerson, who is the director of business development. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Lisa Giles, who is the lead technical writer at Biosciences. And finally, the senior technical writer, Dr. Laura Marinelli. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to begin by sharing some of the questions we've reached from the audience prior to today. Thank you to those who have sent them in. Then we will take questions from today's attendees. Please remember to type your questions in the question box throughout the discussion or raise your hand to ask a live question. Our first question is, we see in publications and perhaps even in grant writing that the use of AI is not allowed. How is this enforced? How can we use this to our advantage of grant and manuscript submissions?
Thank you. I'll take this one. Yeah, so AI, it's a challenging issue. It's a space that's changing really rapidly. Our expertise here, we see a lot different guidelines, as you noted, with journals, with grants. With grants in particular, there's the recent NIH. We're going to talk about this more later, but the NIH is now forbidding the use of AI to develop your grant. And they don't, it's kind of a bit vague because they don't want it, like, forget exactly the wording, but they don't want substantial AI develop or usage, but you could use a little bit of AI. And so we're kind of seeing a lot of confusion, from our clients too. And, we see grants coming in that have used AI. I think that, it's a couple different questions here. So how are these kind of regulations enforced? The short answer is it's hard to know, really. There's a lot of different tools available to screen for AI. They have reportedly, some are better than others, some aren't so good. And the NIH is most likely using something like that, journals are most likely using these types of tools. But in most cases, we don't know exactly what tools they're using. And that's true for the NIH as well. So, my advice is always, keep your AI usage, particularly for grants, to a minimum. It's a great resource, but, it's still not a substitute for human input. And, that's really going to be what's important. Oh, thank you. There's our slide. Yes, they don't want substantially developed by AI. I think that if you want to use it, I think refinement is really where to go. The grant should be written by you, but you could certainly use it to, okay, this is a little too long. Maybe you look for suggestions to make it a little more concise, or, suggestions for improving, kind of basic grammar sorts of things. But, with anything that goes through AI, you just got to be really on the lookout for common issues. Like I said, we see a lot of AI, stuff that's been generated by AI or substantially used AI, and things jump out. So we see redundancy is a big issue, kind of repetitive. Grant writing, you do have to be repetitive with, like, you got to pepper in your hypothesis and whatnot, but it's not like that. It's just sort of these kind of generic statements and phrasing, or even structure of the writing tends to be very repetitive. There's also, it tends to be quite superficial, so kind of broad, big, beautiful sounding statements that don't really actually say anything. So the meat of it's wordiness without substance, is kind of how I would describe it. And then, of course, the issue with, like, hallucinations and inaccuracies is supposedly getting better, but that's always something you need to be really cautious of. There's some other things, people say the M dashes, of course, but beyond that, I think it's more of these, like, content issues that are more concerning, because a grant in particular, you're given a finite amount of space, and it's so important to use that, to get your ideas in and kind of use it, optimize what you're going to say. So I think that you really want to, be cautious of that. And then, in terms of, I think the last part of that was, how could we use that to your advantage? My advice would be, like I said, other than maybe using it for, kind of grammar checks or, hey, can I make this a little shorter, would be to maybe use AI in other areas to maybe streamline email or other things that you could say, free up some space to give you more time for the writing and to really focus on grant development, which is going to be so important. It's a really competitive funding environment. So thinking about how you can distinguish yourself and really produce the best possible proposal, use the AI for that other stuff to give yourself time for the writing.
I wanted to just add on to the end of that. That was a great broader look at things, Laura. But also, in the end, you as the writer are always responsible for whatever you produce. So you don't want to submit something that has an incorrect reference or these hallucinations or incorrect information because it's been pulled from somewhere that you didn't carefully check. So if you're going to use AI, which I think it's a tool it's one of the tools we have for writing, so let's use it. But we have to always realize you are responsible for it. So check it really carefully, have other people look at it, make sure it really represents the way you want to be seen as a scientist and a scholar.
Would it be helpful right now to sort of introduce bioscience writers so that when people are asking questions, they can kind of get the scope of our expertise? So just very quickly, our company, BioScience Writers, has been around for about 20 years, and we're started by Dr. Susan Marriott here on the call to give people focused expert feedback. And so we have PhDs in our research areas. We have a whole team of editors. So we spend our days in and out reading grant proposals, manuscripts, staying up to date on all the editing. People come to us with their problems for writing. So that's our expertise area, if anyone's got questions on all that. So yeah, just quick.
So moving on from that is another question from previous. Is there any way to identify AI-generated research questions or proposal versus the use of AI to improve grantsmanship?
So when you're saying identify, I don't know that there's any clear, like Laura said, there's no clear guidance on how they're finding AI, so much as if they do find it and you can't prove that you haven't used AI, then you're in trouble. So in grants in particular, you have to remember that AI, that the AI environment is not always secure. So if you are putting your grant text into an AI environment that's not secure, you might be sharing that with the world without realizing it. So that's another thing you always have to be really careful about. Some universities are developing their own secure, closed AI environments, and maybe if your university is offering that, that's a good place to kind of start. But you have to be really careful because pretty much any AI company, if you read their terms and conditions, they say that they're going to take anything you put into it to train their future AI. And so if you're using AI to develop ideas, you're kind of putting yourself at risk of, one, having those ideas be out before you're ready for them, and two, like maybe not being able to really explain what you're thinking because AI is thinking about it for you. So that's the kind of where you have to be really careful with grants and with idea generation. It's great to take ideas and maybe use AI to refine a sentence here or just ask, does this make sense? And then if it says no, then maybe it will tell you how to make it make sense, or you can look at it and figure that out. But relying on AI to kind of do it all for you, it puts your ideas at risk if you're not really careful. And sometimes I find that people have written things, or and this happens too, just with writing. They've written things, when I ask them to explain it, they're like, oh, well, I don't know. And that becomes even harder when you have a computer doing the writing for you. So you just have to be really you really make sure you take ownership of your ideas, especially in grants.
I agree with that. So leading off of that as well, you had mentioned that the AI tools are better if you have a university. So someone asked the best AI tools to assist with grant preparation to ease the burden on PIs. So like you had said, maybe through a secure platform, but generally you should be making the content yourself is what I'm getting, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you have access to a secure platform, I've seen people say, take a manuscript and give it to a secure university platform and say, hey, review this for me. The problem is whether AI does a good job reviewing it is kind of also up in the air, and I've seen people complain about getting reviews from journals that have clearly been written by AI, where the AI has raised points that aren't applicable to the manuscript at all. So, you have to really look at what it's saying and see if it's making sense. If it doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to help you improve your ideas or write a better grant or write a tighter manuscript. So, use it if you need a little bit of help and feedback and you're having difficulty, getting that from somewhere. But humans are always going to be better at really letting you know whether other people are likely to understand what you're trying to say.
And
add something maybe. I've written a lot of grants in my career and reviewed a lot of grants, and I've always felt that my ideas and the clarity and quality of what I was thinking about got progressively better the more I wrote this project and the more I looked at it and read it and revised it and worked on it after it came back rejected and had to redo it. I mean, those iterations for me personally brought depths of thinking out that I hadn't had in the beginning. And I think sometimes AI sort of gives us a crutch that's not very helpful in that it doesn't allow you to pull those things out of your head. So as the experts, you know so much and you know what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. And it's kind of an easy way out to ask something else to tell us to help you write that. And it's fine. I think personally for the beginning drafts to get ideas there, but then those next levels of iteration and depth, I think really come to be valuable when you as the scientist and the person involved in the work digs in and really exerts some effort to do that. It's really hard to write. I think we all agree that it takes up time. It's frustrating. It's, we have to throw some of it out and restart. I mean, but that's the process of getting these ideas out. So I would my thoughts are use AI in those beginning stages to push you through that beginning part, because that's hard and time consuming. But that fine tuning at the end, take it on for yourself, at least try, because I think you're going to see how much better things are when you do it versus leaving all that to a computer.
And in terms of which tools to use when, I think a really good place to stay appraised, because this is a constantly changing field, but if you have a LinkedIn profile, I would really keep an eye on that, because people are having very active conversations about, I like to use ChatGPT for tinkering with my language, but you have to get the paid version because it's so much better than the free version. Or I like to use Claude to throw background ideas for things, or I use this specific program for figure making. So staying up to date, because there's no set answers right now for what people like. It's a really interesting time.
So we do have a question from the audience that is within this topic, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it up now. How about using AI to generate model figures or experimental plan figures for grant writing?
I could jump in. I mean, I think that seems like it would be something that would be valid and could probably save you some time. But this is another space and another situation where you need to be really careful and proofread it really carefully. I mean, I know there were some really kind of famous examples of terrible AI figures appearing in manuscripts that somehow slipped under the radar. I'm a word person, so I don't really like making figures and the graphic design part of it. So to me, that'd be like, oh yeah, that would be great. But again, you know, make sure the ideas are yours, and then make sure you just proofread it very carefully, because errors slip in all the time, and you know, they could be easy to miss. You know, at the first glance, oh, that looks beautiful, and then you're like, wait a minute, these words are mixed up, or that's not actually a word. And so, you know, I think that's fine. I'm not sure that that's something that, you know, would be too much of a concern. Again, you know, there's been no like, don't use it for that, or yes, go ahead and use it for that. You know, but to help, you know, maybe to help make a figure nicer, I think that would be pretty reasonable. But again, just, yeah, caution and proofreading, and by someone else too, because you're expecting to see a word, and so your brain fills it in, but then somebody who's not expecting that word is like, oh, wait, that's completely wrong. So another set of human eyes is also really important.
Moving on to a few other questions. So, excuse me, Dr. De Moya wants to know, he's applying for a K-99. What do you think some things that can make what do you think are some things that can make an application stand out to a reviewer?
I can answer that one, or give you my thoughts on that one. So for K-99s, they're a transition grant where you're going from a training situation into an independent research situation, usually K-99R00s or something like that. So what makes you stand out is showing how you're going to differentiate yourself from your current research environment. That is, how are you going to be different, unique, moving forward a certain part of your project that your current research group would not do. And that can be in any direction, but you just don't want to be a replicate, a clone of your advisor and continue to do the same thing, because then you're going to end up sort of competing with them for funding and publishing and other things. And probably at the level of writing a K-99, they're going to be faster than you. They have a bigger research team and things. So you're going to want to pick your idea and make it your own. To do that, I would suggest you talk early on with your current research team about this issue, and talk about what it is that you could take with you or not, things they may want to keep or not. So it's super clear. There's no uncertainties about this. You're going to invest your time in things that you actually can take, not at the end them saying, oh no, you can't have that reagent or something. So I would describe those ideas as part of a good process of being prepared for your K-99. The other thing is the K-99s are really focused on your career development. It's a research grant, but there's a huge component of it that's about you growing as a scientist. So while you're in the K-99 portion of the grant, you're going to want to talk about what courses you might take, what new areas do you need to get better at. Maybe you're going to learn bioinformatics or something. Maybe you don't do that now and your lab doesn't do it. But you know that in order to take this to that next level of innovation and creativity that will be your own research lab, you want to integrate that. So you can be doing that now as training. So you're going to write about that. And explain why. So you want to explain in the K-99, I want to be doing this 5 or 10 years from now. In order to be doing that then, I need to learn this now so I can complement what I already do and create this entirely new research area. So long answer, but I think that's the idea, is show your uniqueness or your plans for unique directions that you're going to take. And also while you're doing that, why it's important that you do that those are problems and questions, and maybe no one's addressing them because they don't have that specialized combination of skills that you will be developing during this project. I mean, that's really compelling to a reviewer when they see someone lay out a nice plan like that. I've reviewed K-99s and I think, wow, this person's in an awesome lab now. They see this future. They know exactly how to get there. They've got resources. They've got an environment that will support them. I mean, how could you say no? It's very compelling.
Another question for funding. Funding for international postdocs, maybe postdocs in industry. Do you have any input on that?
Yeah, so I'm going to start just by acknowledging that it's a tougher environment for international postdocs for getting funding. There's just less opportunities available. One of the ones that people, usually hear about is the NIH K99R00. There's no citizenship requirement for that one, so it's always worth looking at, but it is highly competitive. For things like industry postdocs, I hear of them from time to time, and people occasionally do come asking for help for those kinds of applications, but you've really gotta, you're gonna have to get specialized more. There's no, line for postdocs, like line up for international funding here. Like, networking as much as possible to hear about these opportunities that other people aren't hearing about is the best piece of advice I can give. And sometimes people create opportunities for you if you talk to them enough. Like there's not an easy answer for this one. Yeah.
Moving along with that.
If you were to Google or search for international fellowships for postdocs, you'll find institutions that have assembled those lists in their research offices. So you can find them. I have a few that I've collected over the years, but I don't think they're really current at the moment. But if you need help on that, we can help you figure out how to look for them and identify ones that might meet your needs.
So also more funding. Are there specific industry or philanthropic partners you recommend reaching out to at this time?
I'm curious about, I know that we can't, go back and ask people like who asked this question why, because I'm curious where it's coming from. I don't know that I had specific recommendations for them to just go ask for. I mean, I can tell you that there are industries that are partnering and looking for ways to partner with universities in different ways. But it's not like you can just email them and say, hello, I would like to work with you. Like, you kind of have to already be working with them in some capacity. So I'd say keep an eye on that and really keep track of your institutional resources. A lot of institutions will have something like a foundation relations office, and they can help you identify foundations that, they never post opportunities, but the relations office will have some sense of like, hey, these people have something in the pipeline. So like just going around asking questions and finding out what's at your institution, because they usually will have an office somewhere that will connect you so that you're not sending blind emails.
Thank you. That's all for our registered participants that ask questions. So I would like to remind everyone that you can type your questions in the question box throughout the discussion. And we don't have any questions right now, so I will start with some of the prepared questions. How are investigators handling the new NIH regulation that limits investigators to 6 submissions each year? It's a very daunting environment for new PIs because the advice has previously been to submit as many proposals as possible.
So I can answer that. So for starters, 6 proposals in a year is 1 every 2 months. If you are preparing more than 1 proposal every 2 months, you are either a superhero, you're using AI, which is why they put this guideline in place, or you're doing really superficial grant writing, which is not to your benefit. So I've talked to a couple of different people and they're like, yeah, this really doesn't affect us. Even though we submit a lot of grants, we've never done 6 in a year. So what I suggest, and especially right now when kind of grant funding is contracting, quality is more important than quantity. Spend your time, take the time to put in a really good, really strong grant, take a little bit of extra time to make sure it's compelling and clear and will read well and make a really good argument for why somebody should give you limited resources. Quality is always more important than quantity. It doesn't matter if you submit 30 grants if none of them get funded. 1 good grant will get you where you need to be.
I think that's super. I love that answer. I also would add that the limitation is 6 grants per year to the NIH, as I understand it. That doesn't mean 6 grants is all you can submit for the whole year, because there are many other kinds of funding agencies. And sometimes you can repurpose a grant. I 150% agree with Lisa that quality far exceeds quantity in its value to you. But if you write a really great grant for NIH, you could take parts of it and recreate something from it where you're reusing some of that content, but directing it to another, like American Heart Association or some other group that is going to look at it separately. And you may say, well, but I can't have two grants of the same topic. That's true. But you don't necessarily have to have them the same topic. You can make them, one is NIH and it's focusing on this. The other one is almost the same, but it's focusing on this special case of heart issues that are related. Also, it doesn't mean that you can't submit two grants that are quite similar to different agencies. You can't submit two similar grants to the NIH. Don't do that. Or the same agency, even if they're sort of different, don't do that. That'll be problematic. But if you can put them in separate groups, separate, government and foundational, let's say, and by chance, because you're such an awesome researcher and writer that they both get funded, you just choose the one you want and decline the other one. There's nothing wrong with that. So there's really not a way to lose there. You're going to get the biggest benefit by doing great work, writing it up super well, and then reusing the pieces in a very thoughtful, intellectual way to your benefit.
Are reviewers changing how they evaluate proposals now that the NIH has implemented the new review framework?
That one, I was thinking about this before, and the answer is yes, period. That is changing. How it's changing is a little trickier to say because it's quite new and there haven't been that many study sections and review panels that have actually implemented it, and we haven't seen yet that many of those reviews to know what they look like. But what I'm hearing, and the rest of our team can chime in as needed, is that the reviewers should be focusing on, let me just pull this up a little bit, the research itself, the significance and innovation that you're including. They don't want to see iterative proposals, like not 10 proposals of the same thing. And your approach, those are things that get scored, right? And the scoring is going to determine what they're focusing on for your grant. Now, there's other sections of your grant that have to be there, like a description of you and your experience and your collaborators and the environment you're in and your core resources and statistical help and all that sort of stuff. That has to be there to show that you've got everything you need, but it's not scored. So it doesn't get as much attention in the discussion that goes on for your grant, as well as the written comments that you'll get back. So that's kind of how it's changing, but what that looks like, I've also heard from reviewers that it's very hard for them to make this change. There used to be 5 review criteria, now there's 3, and they're used to 5, and I've only reviewed with 5. And it would be really hard to change the way we think about this because most of reviewers have done it, tens of 20 of times. And so they're still struggling getting out of their habits to these. So I think it's going to be an evolving kind of view of what these reviews look like and what they are able to focus on. But the goal is to take away as much emphasis on that you happen to be at an institution with outstanding research dollars already, because they were trying to spread the wealth a little bit and recognize that good research can be going on at much more diverse types of institutions. But we shall see. Lisa, you were going to comment?
I was going to add to that. So I spent a lot of time watching the NIH webinars when they were working on the process of rolling this out. And the goal of the new framework was to try and make sure that they were funding research that deserved to be done. And so that's why they kind of combined significance and innovation into a single position, because they were seeing people who weren't getting funded because they were getting low innovation scores, even though the significance of what they were trying to do was important.
Mhm.
It just wasn't, nothing was innovative about it. It just still needed to be done. But in the few summary statements that I've seen using this framework, I agree with Susan that some reviewers are having a hard time letting go of the 5 criteria, and they're still pointing out the innovation holes. And sometimes they'll have a separate, bullet point of just for innovation, because that's what they're used to. That's the framework that they have. Maybe they have a document a template that they use, and they haven't figured out how to adapt it to this new framework. So there's a little bit of a transition period. And I think that there was supposed to be a training period when they shifted over this framework that got a little disrupted by all the government shutdowns and all the changes at NIH. And so a lot of people haven't gotten the training in how to do this review. So for probably the next year or two, there's going to be a little bit of overlap between people who were still scoring on the thoughts of the old process and people who are adapting to the new one. So it's just, you just have to make your best case for also, why you're why your science is innovative and significant. I mean, even when they were setting this up, people at NIH constantly said that they don't expect the process of writing the grants to change. They still expect you to lay out the significance, to lay out the innovation, to lay out the approach. I will say that rigor and feasibility section, people are paying a lot more attention to rigor. The summary statements that I see, they get really critical about people who aren't showing that their studies are appropriately powered, that they're not justifying, the sizes of their samples and all that. That's become something that's very common. So when you're writing up your grants, make sure that you are justifying the experimental design, the sample size, showing that you are going to be able to find significant outcomes the way that you're doing it.
What is the best possible way to prepare a proposal submission before the RFA is released? It seems more and more common that opportunities are posted just weeks before the due date, and the timeline seems impossible for large proposals.
I could take this one. This is a challenging issue that's kind of come up more and more with our clients. We've seen too, they're waiting for calls that were, they were told we were going to come out and they're not coming out. And so they're sort of in this, limbo state. I would say that the best advice that we give is just to, keep the process moving, keep, you don't want to wait. You don't want to just, there's a lot you could do to sort of position yourself to be ready to go when the calls are released, or, hopefully they are, which we'll get to. But so just, some things I would consider is, for any grant, there's going to be team members, co-investigators, collaborators. What I would say is start getting everybody on board, have discussions, have meetings, talk about, think about what mechanism you're going to be pursuing. Is this an R01? Is it an R21? We've seen a lot of larger, center proposals too, larger efforts. One I worked on recently was an RM1, and that's not a center grant, but it's like a larger collaborative effort. It's a multi-PI grant, so it's sort of structurally like an R01, but it's for perspective, R01s are 12 pages. This is a 30-page grant. It's multi-PI. It's a single set of aims, but you're expected to have, it's a team-based effort. It's a collaborative effort. There's a whole team management plan associated with it, but it's for these larger, bigger problems that, one investigator couldn't necessarily effectively address in a single lab, or with, maybe with just one co-I. So, you think about what you want to accomplish, get your team in place. You could also, maybe look at the parent announcements. So there's going to be some differences, of course, if you're waiting for a specialized RFA to come out, but the parent announcement, you can at least get a general sense of what is required if you're, going for an R01, if you're thinking about some of these more specialized mechanisms. You could start drafting your aims. You can think about the science. Really, this is the opportunity to do all the groundwork, make sure your preliminary data are rigorous, as Lisa talked about, sample sizes, all that. You could really position yourself well if you've thought about that, and consulted with a biostatistician. use the time to your advantage. Of course, it's frustrating because you want to get going and you want to know what's happening, but there are things you could do. And I talked about the center grants. That's a good. Those are collaborative. So get your team in place. Think about who's going to fill certain roles. Who's going to be the director, who is going to serve as leads on the different cores. You could look at. You could talk to your colleagues and look at older grants. Again, things are changed, but you could still get some perspective from those. There's also, as we all know with grants, there's a lot of documents that are required. So you can get your bio sketches. We could talk about that later, but the new bioscience or the new biosketch format, it's not always seamless. And so if you could take care of that and, make sure everything's ready to go on that end, your budgets, at least drafted. Again, things may change or have to be adjusted a bit when the final call is released, but if they're 80% ready to go, you're in a great spot. Another thing, you could always reach out to your program officer for guidance or for insight. They can't always tell you, but you can request a phone call, and they might be able to give you at least some perspective on, be on the alert for, set up alerts. They won't necessarily say when it's expected, but they might give you some hints as to, when you should be looking. And it's always beneficial. I always recommend talking to your program officer because you can get a lot of really good insight, especially through a phone call. And then, I guess lastly, consider other funding opportunities. If you had the specialized call, you really wanted to go for it, it's not there, you could consider applying for the parent. One of the things we've heard kind of anecdotally was that there are going to be fewer specialized RFAs, and that, it's more and more just expected that you're going to apply under the parent announcement. Not for in all cases, but so, it's just something to consider, because you don't want to miss out on an opportunity because what you were expecting didn't show up. So be flexible and willing to consider other options too.
And I'll just bring this up now because you touched on it, Laura, but so you should be able to see a slide here with some of the bigger changes, their AI policy, BioSketch, and your review framework. If there's one thing we can emphasize to you guys today is keep your program officers close, because there's so many changes happening. There's a lot of differences that we're seeing from across institute to institute, so things are being implemented differently. So have conversations because things are changing very quickly.
When does it make sense to pursue high-risk, high-reward funding mechanisms versus more incremental ones?
I can take this one. So I have heard the phrase, sometimes I think the biggest issue people have is trying to decide or differentiate incremental versus high-risk, high-reward. And the best description that I've heard is that if you have a problem that could be solved easily with the resources currently available, if you had all the time and money in the world, they're going to look at that as incremental. Somebody will do it eventually. It will be done. It might take a couple of years. It may take a lot of funding, but it's not new. It's not innovative. High risk, high reward is something where there's some challenge or some roadblock or some bottleneck that cannot be addressed with what is currently available, and that in order to go to the next level, you have to introduce an innovation that's going to solve that problem that doesn't exist right now, and it might fail. So a high risk, high reward funding mechanism requires you to identify that currently impossible challenge, show them how you think you can fix it, and explain why you are the only one that can do it. These high risk, high reward, they're very usually, like the ARPA-H mechanisms are like $30 million awards. They're huge. They usually involve a lot of moving parts, and they're willing to invest a lot of money into something that will address that kind of impossible challenge. So that you just have to have a good high risk, high reward idea that's not going to be viewed as incremental. NIH they want a little bit of innovation, but just a little bit. They want you to show that you are going to do what you propose to do, that you have all the pieces in place, that it's feasible, that it's supported by rigorous data, that you in 5 years will have accomplished what you have set out to do. that's not a high risk, high reward. So don't, it's hard to take that kind of approach that you would normally use for like an NIH grant and apply for a high risk, high reward grant, because what they are really looking for when they say high risk, high reward is something that very well might fail. You will still learn something through the failure process, but you are not guaranteed success. And so if you have an idea like that you cannot get funded because you have no idea whether it will succeed, that's when you might want to consider high risk, high reward.
We do have a question from the audience. Under NIH Simplified Review Framework for RPG applications, how would you advise early stage investigators to think about submission strategy? For someone transitioning from postdoc to an instructor or other non-tenure track role, is the traditional K99 ROO or K01 pathway still usually the best move? Or are there situations where it makes sense to pursue an R01 earlier and more aggressively, given the preliminary data is there, etc.? And where, if at all, does an R35 fit into that strategy?
That's a good question. I can start with some ideas, and the rest of our team can chime in as needed. So I think you should start with the funding opportunity, the grant mechanism that seems to fit best to what you have. And that could be an R01. There's nothing wrong with that. And it is a bit of a larger grant than, say, an R21 or even the K99s. But if you've got the data, you've got a great postdoc experience and group that you can move forward with, go for it. I would also suggest that you look at the NIH website at which grants are being funded at what % rates. So if you are having to choose between submitting an R01 versus an R21, for example, an R21 is a little bit of a smaller grant. It's a 6-page proposal versus a 12-page proposal, usually smaller amount of money, shorter time for funding. I believe it's 3 years versus 5 years. So it kind of, you think about it like that would be the best one to start with because it should be a little easier, right? It's the smaller one. I'm not asking for too much, so maybe they'll give me that as a start. The last time I looked in, and different NIH institutes fund differently, but the R21s were being funded at a lower rate than the R01s. So you could submit R01s and you'd have a better chance of funding than an R21, even though the R21s look more appealing maybe for a first-time grant. So it doesn't mean that you should just look at that as your only option, but consider a lot of things, right? And so say, well, the R01s, if I need to submit my grant to say NCI, and I'm just going to make this up because I haven't looked at their data recently, and let's say NCI is funding R01s at a better percentage than R21s, I might think about, can I make this an R01 versus R21? Or how would I work around those things if I'm thinking about, K99s, etc. So there's a lot of different elements that come into play in making that decision, but I wouldn't shy away from a grant that looks maybe a little more daunting because it may still be a perfect mechanism for you. And as I think Laura just mentioned, talk to your program officer. They'll look at like a specific aims page or your general ideas, or you can talk with them if you can get a call with them. And they'll say, this looks like a grant, and your ideas look appropriate for an R01, or they probably aren't, and they would go better, as an R21 or a K. So all those things will be consideration. So there's no one right answer here. It's just where you are and what opportunities seem like the best fit for you. Do the rest of you guys have other ideas?
Well, I would just say that if you're thinking about a K or an R, right? The really important thing is that a K requires that training element. So if you don't have a need for more training to do what you're proposing in your R, it's gonna be clear. The reviewer is gonna look at your training and say, well, why do you need to do that? You already know how to do all this. You don't need any of this to do what you're planning to do. So if you don't need the training and you can't come up with a good way to integrate some kind of training, then a K might not fit for you. If you're prepared to jump ship and you have a fully developed program that you're ready to propose, you might not be able to be a good fit for a K. So, you know, the career development part of that K is extremely important. They really want to know that you have a plan for actually growing, and it's not superficial. So if you don't need that growth, it's not going to score well.
Mm-hmm.
You also have to be at a particular, job rank to be allowed to submit certain grants. So ours, typically, you have to have a faculty level appointment. Like a postdoc generally can't be a PI of a R grant, although it is possible some institutions. So there's a variation there, but you also have to consider where you are in your training and what you're going to be eligible for right away.
That's a really good point, because I was thinking that too with the R01s. You might not be able to, depending on where you are. The other, I think there was a question about the R35s too, which is a great mechanism. And that's the one I believe that has more flexibility. It has like a little longer support potential. And I know for a while they were really pushing, trying to get people to apply for the R35s. They're still quite competitive, but the structure is different. And so if you're thinking about an R35, I would just encourage you to, read carefully, look into it, what is actually required, because it's going to be more a flexible mechanism where they're really funding a research program versus a specific project with a discrete set of aims. And so it's designed that way to sort of, provide that ability to innovate and pivot based on, what your data show you in the early stages of the project. So for a new investigator, that might be a great mechanism, because you're thinking about, okay, I'm starting my lab. I want to have somebody working on, this pathway, but I also have somebody working in the mouse model looking at this. And so you can kind of write your R35 as sort of justification for supporting your program as a whole, rather than, oh, I have this specific project with these 3 aims and these sub aims. So, I do think the R35 could be really helpful. And I think they have them for ESIs and for more established investigators. So yeah, just kind of think about what your goals. There was also, a question about, I think, with a client, one of my previous clients, about submitting concurrent R35s and R01s. So that's something I would check with, because that could be an issue. They might not allow you to submit to the same institute. If you, even though maybe they're not related, you have to be really careful with that. So again, just make sure you're checking on those things and speaking with your program officer if there's anything is unclear.
That's Laura just brought up really good a term, ESI. So this is early stage investigator that we really haven't talked about yet, but that's a certain status that you can have. And if you get a grant funded, if you have an R grant funded, or at least an R01, it takes you out of the ESI status. And why do you care? It's because if you're an early stage investigator, you're going to have a benefit of score in your grant review process. So when they're reviewing your grant, if you are an early stage investigator, they're going to give you some extra points to bump you up, or lower your score, whatever way you look at it, to make your grant score better. And once you're out of that category, because you've got some experience, you're no longer eligible for that. So most people try to protect the ESI status as long as they can, like by not using up that big grant that's going to take them out of the pool and into the now fully competitive group too soon. But yet, if that's the right thing for you to do, that's probably the best move. So consider that as well.
So we have a few questions. This one is for Dr. Marriott specifically. Does biosciences have scientists with technical expertise that can read grants and make really useful changes in grant structure and technical issues to improve a grant in specific areas? This person, Dr. Pincus, is a former SRO with over 30 years of experience at NIH.
Yep. My answer in one word is absolutely. We do this every day. We work on grant proposals. I mean, all the people on this call from our company are all Ph.D. scientists who are excellent at critically evaluating the proposal, the ideas, and how well it aligns with the funding calls that are out there. So that's what we try to provide. When I founded the company as a scientist, an academic researcher, I'm at a great institution, but I just didn't think we had a lot of resources for faculty who had the time to give me the amount of feedback that I wanted. I have great colleagues, but they gave me kind of quick, superficial, yeah, looks good, or, you know, might change this or that, but it wasn't what I was going to see in the review itself. So I felt like we needed a resource that was going to give people access to expertise that would really give them that extremely thorough, detailed look at their proposals with all kinds of comments and details of what we don't understand, what doesn't make sense, what's not consistent with the funding announcements, where or the consistent with your stage of your career development, all these things. So yeah, that's what we do day in and day out, and we fortunately have had a good amount of success with it, and lots of clients that like what we do. So that, you've hit it on the nose as to what we like to do in our time.
So we have two similar questions now. They kind of go over the same thing, but this person says that they had recently returned to academia after a 3-year gap, and their current role is as a research faculty. They've shifted their research focus to a new area, but don't have any publications in that field. How will funding agencies evaluate the grant proposals under these circumstances? They have previously received foundation grants in the past.
So I would suggest, if you can, find a collaborator that has experience in the field, to kind of demonstrate that you were working with somebody who has expertise in the field. If you have enough preliminary data in this area, but not a publication, sometimes that will be sufficient if you can show that your lab is working toward it. You're succeeding in what you're trying to do. You have, the right reagents, you have the right, models, they're all working. You just need the time to get them together and put them together. That can sometimes be enough. It depends a little bit on what kind of mechanism you are applying for. You can also address the gap in your personal statement, in your biosketch. That's supposed to be what it's there for. How reviewers respond to that varies. So, just try to be clear that you've returned, you have this data, your project is feasible, and if you can get a collaborator that has a successful program that's there to support you, that always helps.
Mm-hmm.
Leading off of that question,
try to get a publication.
Yes.
You can, there's ways you can grow a little project in a fast way enough to get something out with your name on it in that field. And even if it's not, the most groundbreaking thing, it's going to help you show expertise in that area. It's going to look good when you put the proposal in. You don't have to. You can use collaborations, which I think are a great idea that Lisa mentioned. But you also need to work on your own name being on there as well.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to add, and it might depend on, it's going to depend on a lot of things, but I would look into the various K mechanisms, because as a research faculty, you might be able to partner with someone who could act as a mentor especially if you're changing fields. It sounds like that was the part of the question. So I think that I was trying to remember the specific mechanism that was focused on investigators who are changing research focus or changing fields, and you might be able to look for that type of specialized mechanism that would really.
I think it's the CATS award.
Maybe, yeah. So again, that's rather than just looking at it, okay, I want to just apply for an R21 in this new project. Think about, okay, what mechanism might be most beneficial for me in this situation. And yeah, if you could bring on a mentor, I mean, even if you're not, necessarily junior, but somebody who's maybe established in the field who could, mentor you through that transition into this new research area, that might work. And you have to check the requirements for that award, but that would be something to at least look into.
Another thing you might be able to look at is if your institution has some kind of training mechanism in this field too, then that might be able to help you support you. So sometimes that's a K mechanism or a T mechanism that's more institutional wide that will help you kind of support you for maybe a couple of years while you develop your publications and the data that you need for an R. And sometimes those you would just have to talk to your department and find out if your institution happens to have that available. But that's another way that you can switch focus.
So we are running out of time. We have time for one more question. For instructors or other non-tenure track faculty who are eligible to apply for R Series awards, how much do unresolved questions about lab space, institutional support, and independence affect competitiveness? And when do those concerns argue for a K mechanism instead of an early R?
For an R, I think you have to realize that if you choose to do an R, you're going to be expected to provide all the information that's going to need to be supported for anyone submitting an R. You don't get a special situation because of what your rank is. So if you are eligible for an R and you have everything you need, which will include a commitment to space and funding, go for it. If you don't have a commitment to space, I would talk to your research office at the institution to see if you could possibly get something allotted to you, or talk to your program officer to see how you might navigate that. It might be pretty challenging for you to get that type of grant if you don't have certain resources like that. But you want to start that process and do a smaller grant or talk to the institution. But what am I going to need to do to get from being an instructor into an assistant professor level or research assistant professor or whatever it's going to be, where you can get something designated to you that will make you eligible for these other things. So yeah, you can't just say, because I'm at this rank, please don't make me show that I have space and I want an R01. It just isn't probably going to work that way. So that's my comment.
Even for Ks, you need to show the support of a mentor and the support of your institution. You're going to need a letter from your dean saying that they will support you for the, that you will have a space for the entirety of your K award, that, that your employment is not contingent on anything, so that, you're employed for a year, but you have a K for 2 years, and that second year you're out of luck. They have to support you the entire time that you have that award. So you have to have all of that support mechanisms and letters of support in place.
Another thing I've seen relevant to that is that the reviewers and the funding agency, at least the NIH groups I'm familiar with, don't like to see a grant where you've gotten a commitment for them to cover, say, your salary or give you some space, but it's contingent on you getting the grant. Like they say, we will give you the space and we will increase your salary and we will give you this appointment if you get the grant. They want you to have the commitment of your institution with or without the grant. If it doesn't feel like your institution believes in you enough to commit to you for that, it's not as compelling of a proposal. So what you need to have is your institutional support saying, we're going to do this for you because you are an outstanding researcher and we want you to get funded and be able to continue your work. Not that we want to see if you can get funded if anyone else thinks you're good, and then maybe we'll give you an increase in your title or something. So sort of be aware of that and perhaps use that to leverage within the institution, showing them, like, I can do this, I have all these ideas, but you need to give me this title and some designated space so I can be as successful as I can.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. If you have further questions, please email info@navbo.org and we'll make sure to share them with our panel. We hope you enjoyed this workshop and can take away some practical strategies to use in your future grant writing. And of course, please remember to check out all our NAVBO events on the calendar of events on our website. Vasculata is coming up. Abstract deadline is May 15th, and the Vasculata will be through July 7th through the 10th. And you can visit our calendar of events here. Thank you to our panelists.
Good luck, everybody.